Okay. So I wanted to talk about one of the apparently common experiences post, let's say, post-awakening. And maybe describe or talk about my experience of that. So initially it seemed like there was a duality, or the mind framed a duality between awakening or ultimate reality and the relative world, or the mind's narrative, the separate self and its story. It seemed like there was a shift out of that, a kind of expansion out of that. That's the way the mind framed it anyway. But in that, there was a kind of subtle reification of the narrative, a subtle confirmation in the belief of the reality of the mind's narrative, the mind's story. And similarly, there was the same thing with the awakening, in the way the mind frames it as an experience, as an attainment, as something tangible or real that can be grasped or got or lost. And it seems like with this initial recognition, there is a period of kind of obliteration of the reality of the narrative self, the reality of the seeking self, and all the associated sufferings, and you kind of like become immersed in an effortlessness and have a really intense and simple and effortless, expansive insight into the non-dual state, if you could put it that way. But what tends to happen, I think, is that the mind, the sense of self, recognises this. It recognises something, and it tries to I'm kind of giving it a bit too much credit here, but this is in a bit too much kind of personification, but this is what it kind of does. It notices this threat and it reconfigures itself to deal with that threat. So it could reconfigure itself to shift some of its patterns of seeking and aversion to things. It could shift that to align with a spiritual context, or it could shift that to align with a pseudo psychological understanding of this awakening. The weird thing about it is that you can't really remember, the mind can't remember, because it's not something that occurs in time. It's not something that happened. The shift, the recognition, is not something that happened in time, and the mind can't cope with that. It can't comprehend that. It can't go there. So it does its best to reform a narrative that makes it feel like it understands what happened, and that's the defense mechanism. It's like, I understand what happened, and I can control this in the future. because if anyone has experienced, let's say, this recognition, and again, it's not really an experience, but let's just say that for now, it's the self isn't there, the thoughts aren't there, that mind entity, at least for me, just wasn't present in a lot of that. At least in the sense that it was believed in, at least in the sense that it was taken to be what I am as a real thing. So for me there was a reconfiguration into a spiritual context of this seeking. And the whole spiritual path essentially is like a giant, just like a giant seeking function. Any spiritual journey in time is seeking. And this isn't in time, this is about stopping here, just coming to a standstill, not looking forward, not looking back, not moving forward, not moving back, not moving at all, just now, just this. And the mind will want to pull you one way or another, and it's very, very skillful and intelligent in its efforts to do that. But after this, I talked about this earlier in the channel, after this initial recognition, the illusion was exposed. The belief in that fictional self was damaged to the point where I couldn't, because I had experienced something, let's say, that was more real than the life that I had been living directly. There was no way I could ever go back into the full belief of that fictional narrative, that separate self, that me that's real and exists in an after time. Because that was mostly based in thought, the thought kind of thinned to an extent where the emotions associated with that were brought up into the forefront of experience. So what I was experiencing now was less of a belief in the reality of the story, the thoughts, the contextualization and the meaning of these emotions and how they refer to this me. I didn't fully believe in that anymore. But the emotions were there, and because there wasn't that belief structure, the emotions came through stronger, much stronger. And I could actually begin to notice the pattern of what the separate self does. It separates itself from this immediate experience, goes into a time narrative and tries to explain, project and remember and control for this immediate reality. These emotions, this physical experience, it tries to control for that because it can't quite, it's scared of the emotions. This separate self is scared of experience. It's scared of experience, it resists experience, and its motivation a lot of the time is aversion to this. And it does that through thinking, it does that through ideas and conceptualizations. When these emotions came up, I noticed the pattern. I noticed the pull back into the mind, try and figure it out. And I saw that happen automatically, because I didn't fully believe in the one who that referred to as a separate individual person, me. I saw the pattern, and the pattern was a pattern. It was automatic. There wasn't an entity here who had autonomy controlling this. Over time, let's say, but always in the moment, I observed this pattern and the associated emotions, and saw that it was entirely automatic, entirely triggered by innumerable causation and conditions in this environment, and continually triggered by conditioning of this body-mind. And then there was the biggest shift of all, the biggest insight, realization, that I wasn't resisting the separate self. I accepted it for what it was. I saw it for what it was. This is a weird way of talking about it, but I saw that it was me. It wasn't separate from me. It wasn't an enemy. I had made an other me out of this spiritual context that was then resisting this mind entity. So it kind of felt like I merged with it. I fully accepted it, had full compassion there, and just went head first into the emotions associated, the emotions as they're coming up, and was no longer resisting the thoughts, because I could see that the thoughts, I could see that in separating myself from the separate self, I was just creating another self, and observing it. I was observing it from a position, and it was just that constantly going back, coming through the back door, going back, coming through the back door, that loop, that bouncing about in the kind of mirrors of the mind, adopting different positions, and then that whole thing just collapsed. And in collapsing, there was no longer an aversion to the thoughts, and there was no longer an aversion to the emotions or any experience. And it just became more simple. More simple, as in whatever was coming up, thoughts, emotion, experience, triggering situations, reactions, that's just what I am at that point. That's just what this is at that point. Just going straight into it. You're going straight into the experience, and just moving with the experience, such that there's nothing to stand back from it and analyse it. There's nothing to separate from it and take a position of judgment, of resistance, aversion, or seeking because of that experience. I think the key to that was the emotions. The key to that was actually feeling the emotions, rather than numbing the emotions by avoiding them with the mind and with this fictional entity. But that had to be that circuit, that pattern had to be exhausted. It had to run itself into the ground, let's say. It had to run itself to the end. It had to play out the way it did. It kind of had to, all of that had to happen, let's say, in order for that to be clear, for that function, that mechanism of self to be exposed for a bunch of thoughts. Yeah, I don't know if I've explained that very well, but what I noticed then, before this, was that buying fully into the thinking patterns which were linked to emotions. So an emotion would come up and it would seem to be associated with a pattern of thought. Buying into the narrative would cause physical symptoms, cause physical pain symptoms, cause kind of a feeling of resistance in the body, a feeling of pain or discomfort in the body in various forms. So it was almost like there wasn't really a choice to go down the thinking route and buy in. The only thing there was to feel the emotion, just to experience the emotion, and in a sense become the emotion. Not an emotion happening to me, but just emotion. And at a certain point it becomes clear as well that the automatic nature of these patterns, that there's no one controlling them. There's no one who is at the centre of it. There are just reactions. There's just the environment, let's say. There's just experience. There are triggering situations, there are reactions, there's reactivity, there's emotions, there's reactive thoughts. There's no one thinking them, there's no one feeling them. There's no one getting triggered. It's hard to explain that, but not really. There's no entity who this all applies to, who this all belongs to, who is responsible for controlling all of this, who is responsible for reacting to these conditions. And a funny thing happens over time is that this seeking function, this need to change things, this need to resist things, this need to not react to things, this need to be awakened, this need to act spiritually, is just a seeking, is just a resistance to what is. And when what is allowed, is when there's a full immersion in the experience, when there's full presence in the experience, the universe takes care of itself, and these patterns diminish over time. They get weaker and weaker. And I think how to describe this. It's not like you learn a skill of how to react to things. It's not like I had an awakening and now I have gained the skill to react in the proper way to things. The reaction just happens. The universe takes care of itself. It doesn't need to be controlled. It doesn't need. That was never happening in the first place. There was never someone who gained an awakening. There was never someone who had an awakening experience, which now bestows upon them this peace which allows them to respond correctly to all situations. That was never. that was always bullshit. That was always bullshit. Who knows what is going to happen? Who knows what's happening? That's the scary part, the letting go. And I don't have to control this. What happens is already happening. What's happening is already happening. There's no one here controlling it. That's just an illusion. That's just a mind game. That's the hardest, scariest thing to accept, to the extent that you can't even really accept it. It just has to be clear. It just has to become clear. And I can't really explain how that happens, because it's not like you gain clarity it's just that the clarity is always here, the peace is always here. It's not like you gained peace or gained understanding in the way that the mind thinks it's going to gain it. The access is continuous, the access is infinite, it's always here. Always here. It's understanding that function of pulling away from it, of separating from it into an individual entity. And then let's say experiencing what was always the case anyway, which is just this, which you hear all the time, which can be helpful sometimes, but it's like the me can never lose it or gain it, because the me isn't real. And I think this is the part where relatively adopting some kind of intuitive direction, which might look like practice, will be beneficial, because whatever way, I mean, you are the universe anyway, you are non-dual reality, that nothing is separate. So this is, you are, the infinite wisdom of the universe, the infinite wisdom of ultimate reality. And reality, the universe, just knows what it needs to do. It doesn't need to figure it out, it's happening anyway. It's just becoming comfortable with that, becoming comfortable with not knowing, not having to know, not having to figure it out. It's already figured out. But the function has to be exposed experientially, authentically, in real time. Otherwise it's just a concept. Otherwise it's just the mind pretending. That's the part that's hard to, well, that's the part that's impossible for the mind to understand, but that's the part that the mind doesn't even have access to. The mind isn't even there when this recognition comes in. This recognition is clear. The mind's not there. It doesn't need to be thought about to be gained or lost. It's just, no thought is needed. And that tendency to want to think, to want to explain, I mean, that continues in myself, in my mind, my thought process now. But the recognition is something, I'm not going to say something else, but it's something which encompasses infinitely all of that the mind is blind to. The mind will continue its patterns, it will continue, in this case, trying to over-explain things. But these words, these thoughts, these emotions are all made of the knowing of it, all made of you. It's very paradoxical, but when you see that which knows any of these problems, any of these thoughts that I've lost, I've behaved in an unspiritual way, or I've lost my awakening. Like, who's lost the awakening? Who knows that feeling? What knows those thoughts? That's it. That which the mind thinks it's lost, the mind is made of, those thoughts are made of. It is it. It is it, and that's what's so tricky about it. Because all it takes is a little bit of belief in one thought, and then this illusion manifests. It seems like there's been something lost. It seems like an obscuration, but it's not. It's just an illusion. This can never be lost, of course. it's the belief in it, the dreamlike, hypnotic quality of thoughts. Feeling how that plays out in real time. What is the function like? You notice that. So I over-explain things, right? I'll give a practice here that might be helpful. So whenever you notice the thought like this, that pops up and says, I feel like I've lost this. I had an awakening, I had a glimpse. I feel like now I've lost it and things are back to the way they were. And where is that thought? What is that thought made of? Where is it? Look for it. Actually look for it. When you notice, you feel like when that recognition kicks in that that's a thought, where is that thought? What does that thought refer to? What am I that knows that thought? And then this clarity comes in. It seems like this clarity appears, but it's just the hypnosis, the hypnotic spell of thought is broken, and then there's this clarity. And then what becomes apparent when that clarity comes in? The senses. Immediate reality, let's say, immediate presence, immediate knowing of whatever, including the thoughts. So becoming familiar with that function of what is this experience like when I buy into a thought and I believe it, compared to when I experience myself with clarity. Like there is a seeming contrast there. There is a seeming there's a seeming, well, at least for me, there's a pull back, a numbing, a dimming of the senses. There might be an emotion attached with it. And then once that recognition that that's a thought, I'm believing, there's a belief in a thought, then this clarity of experience will come in, and it might be whatever, but it might be that emotion. You might notice that emotion. Where is the emotion? What does it feel like? Go right into it. Like, bring it up. Experience it as fully as possible. Is that thinking pattern there in order to avoid this experience and then that emotion? Because this might be scary, that might be uncomfortable. Is that what that thinking pattern's doing? Is it seeking comfort? Maybe that's all it's doing, just seeking comfort, seeking its own survival. If that makes any sense. And for me, becoming clear in that function was very useful in dispelling the automatic buy-in, the automatic belief of what the thought's saying and what the thought refers to. Anyway, that'll do for now. Talk to you next time.